Welcome back, DH Crew. Today's hurdle is Sewing 101. Let's get over this hurdle. It's Paula with Daily Hurdles, here today to go over some basic sewing stitches and some tips for beginners. To begin with, the first thing you will need is a sewing kit. This one is featured on our website, dailyhurdles.com, and it's a great starter kit to have around your house. It comes with 38 spools of thread, all different colors, so it's pretty easy to get a color match with anything you're sewing. It has a pretty decent little pair of scissors, some pins, a pin cushion, coarse needles, a magnifying glass, safety pins, and it even has embroidery needles and a crochet hook. Has bobbins for your sewing machine, as well as that thimble to protect your finger. It's also fairly compact, so you can close it up, zip it up, and store it in your suitcase for travel. Sewing kits can be as simple as this one from the dollar store. Has all the little essentials you'll need and fits perfectly in your purse. You can also find these little sewing kits at most hotels. I saved a wedding once with this little guy when the bride's dress strap broke right before she was going down the aisle. The first thing I want to cover is how to thread a needle. Most sewing kits come with this handy little needle threader. It's a simple little tool, but it can be a real lifesaver, especially if your vision isn't perfect. To use this, you simply insert the little thread through the eye of the needle. That gives you a much bigger hole to get this thread through. So you simply put the thread through, pull, and you just threaded a needle. If you're not fortunate enough to have a little threader, you'll have to do this manually. I suggest the first thing is to cut your thread with a sharp pair of scissors. If you cut on an angle, it makes it even easier. You can see the difference between this frayed edge and the not frayed edge. This is much more difficult to try to get through the eye of a needle. So then, manually, you would just have to, and you can see what I'm talking about, how much easier the other way is. Once you've got the needle threaded, you need to make the ends of the thread equal lengths, so we can put a knot in the end. The knot will secure our thread when we start our stitching. To do that, hold the thread between your fingers and wrap it around. Roll the thread towards your end of your finger and grab and pull. That gives us a knot in the end. The first sewing stitch I want to show you is the easiest of stitches. You would use this if you need a quick temporary fix. It's called a running stitch and it looks like this. My needle is already threaded and there's a knot in it. You simply come up through the material and go down. And up and down. Up and down. It's a simple stitch. It's not going to hold anything very long, but in a pinch, it will keep two pieces of material together. You would also use this stitch if you wanted to gather something or make a pull in it. You would simply take this end of the thread and pull, and you get that gathered effect. Now when we're done with our stitch, we have to tie it off. To do that, you stay on the bottom side of your material, go back and pick up the last stitch, go through it again, then loop the needle through the loop. And you do this 2 or 3 times to secure the knot. And we're done. The next stitch I will show you is a double stitch. It's much sturdier than the running stitch and it works well on seams. In this stitch, you start the same way. I have a knot in the end of my thread. You simply come up and put your thread back. Pull through. Now this time, instead of keep running the stitch, we're going to go back to where the first stitch started and go back under here and come up again. Now you might get a little loop here, so all you need to do is pull and it'll come out. You want to get those out as you're going because you don't want to have a bunch of those little extra loops in your thread. Again, we're going to go down where the last stitch ended and come up. Down where the last stitch ended and come up. And that's the double stitch. Again, it's much sturdier because we're actually sewing the same piece twice. Okay, we end it the same way. Pull through, go to the back side, pull up one of those stitches, loop it through once, go under, loop the needle through twice, under, and loop the needle the third time. This will give us a nice secure ending to our stitch. The next stitch I'm going to show you is called a chain stitch or a sewing machine stitch. It is the strongest of all of the stitches and the one I use on the seat of pants that get a lot of tension. In this stitch, you come up through the bottom and down. The difference between this and all the rest is when you come back up, you come up through the center of the previous stitch and down. Again, come up through the center and down. Up through the center. And down. So when we're finished, we're going to do the same. Turn it to the back, go through your previous stitch, put that loop in, come through the loop, and we're going to do that a couple times. 1, 2, 3. And that just ties it off so it doesn't unravel. The next stitch I want to show you is called a blanket stitch, and you use this when you want to secure two edges of fabric together. To start, we have to bury the knot from the end of the thread in between the two pieces of fabric so we don't see it. And then we come through the fabric again, but when we do that, we make a loop and come through. Again, through. Make that loop before you come through. Through. Make that loop before you come through. So when you're finished with your stitch, you're going to want to tie it off. And again, we're going to do it underneath so you can't see it. So we're just going to grab a little piece of fabric. And we're going to make our loop with our knot. And we're going to do that 2 or 3 times. And that's a blanket stitch. So just to recap, these are the 4 stitches that we went over today. The running stitch, which you're going to do in a temporary situation. The double stitch, which you can use on most seams. The sewing machine stitch, which you want to use when you have a real spot with a lot of tension. You want to have a real strong stitch. And the blanket stitch you use when you want to secure the edges of fabric. The last thing I want to go over today is sewing on a button. There is nothing worse than sitting in a waiting room waiting for an interview and notice that you have a button missing. Another perfect reason for keeping that hotel sewing kit in your purse. If you've lost your button, keep in mind that a lot of shirts today have an extra button somewhere in the seam. Assuming you found your button, we have to get the button lined up so it will come through the buttonhole once it's in place. Most of the time you'll see that there's a few holes left where the button came from. If you can see the holes, that's the perfect spot to start. So we're going to put our thread in, and we're going to come up through the material. Then we line up one of the holes in the button and let it go through. Of course, when you're sewing on a button, you're going to want to use the thread color that's close to the button so it sort of blends in. Today I'm using a black thread so you can see, so it's more pronounced actually when I'm sewing. So I'm going to go through the hole opposite. Then you simply come up through the opposite hole and through, so you make sort of like an X pattern. And you repeat this 5 or 6 times so your button is secure. Careful not to poke your finger because it'll bleed and your white shirt will have red spots on it. So when we're finished, we're going to come to the back, pick up a piece of thread, and make the knot that we always make. Come through with a loop once, twice, 3 times. Now your button's nice and secure, and you're ready for that meeting. That's our lesson for today. Be sure to go to dailyhurdles.com and pick up a sewing kit in our online store. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.